What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's hop right into it. So our first tweet is from John at Anthropic, and I guess he was also early at Replit, so that's pretty cool. And he has a very interesting point that he's talking about here where he says, it's kind of ironic how the average workday is getting harder as we progressively automate the easier parts of our jobs, offloading them to agents. Net result is that the average complexity of the tasks we still get to do is actually increasing insofar as we decide to still work the same number of hours, if not more. The more we offload to agents, the harder our days will get. Lots of obvious confounders, so not exactly direct causality, but since Opus 4.5, I feel so much more tired. I get to accomplish crazy more, probably now doing what last year would have considered 3 to 4 distinct jobs all at the same time, but at one price. And then he's just saying the current anxiety in tech is not just that. He also says it could be simply just because we don't get to code for hours in quiet flow. We have to uniquely narrow our focus to only the hardest pieces. I think this is so fascinating. I really agree with this. There's a bunch of different ideas that are coming along with this AI boom that's happening right now, but this one is very unique that I hadn't heard yet, which is essentially all of the work we're doing right now is kind of like, I don't want to exaggerate, but it's kind of like staff/senior level work, right? Where it's like, now you do all the architecting. You don't actually get time to be like, okay, here's the idea. Now I get to go implement it in the code. It's like, no, here's the idea. Here's the decision making. Now go implement it and I'll review it, you know? So we kind of have lost that middle piece of like actually being able to write the code, not necessarily relaxing, but just like throwing on some YouTube, you know, maybe in the background, implementing a design sheet, implementing a design that we figured out previously that was kind of like built into a spec. If you were even documenting, that's the other thing too, is AI obviously makes it so much easier to document these ideas as opposed to just like coding freeform essentially. But I just thought this was a really fascinating idea. And then we have this reply from this guy Alex Zieg as well. I don't know this company, blue check me, but he relates it to kind of like previous thinkers of the past, right? Where so he's like Darwin worked 4 hours a day with 3 90-minute sessions. Poincaré, I don't know who this guy is, maybe a mathematician, I guess, yep. Biggest math breakthrough came stepping onto a bus after days of not thinking about the problem. And then John kind of replies saying, yeah, the shower thoughts are real. And he's probably under leveraging it, which probably me as well, where it's like, I'm not necessarily taking the time to step away to have these thoughts. I notice a lot, like while driving, for example, maybe that's like an LA thing, but while driving, I always have the best ideas, I feel. And it's kind of that same shower thoughts idea of like letting your mind wander so you can come up with new ideas. And my mom used to like talk about this all the time to me as well, where it's like you can't just like focus on problem solving. You kind of have to gather as much information as possible and then let your brain kind of do the processing. But I thought it was really interesting. Uday as well here saying this hits close to home. Before AI tools, I had a natural rhythm of hard decisions mixed with routine coding that gave my brain rest. Now every task that reaches me is a judgment call. 8 hours of pure decision making is way more draining than 12 hours where half was autopilot. So just very interesting. We'll have to see how the industry evolves as we move forward. It is one of those things where it's like with efficiency comes more demand, Jevons paradox, obviously. So we're trying to produce more software, not less, given the efficiency upgrades, but it is quite mentally taxing to always just be in decision making and design mode as compared to like previously where we would have time to write the code and kind of relax, which is very interesting and unique take. Next, we just have a quick tweet from Guillermo, who is the CEO of Vercel, obviously, and he has this quote. I didn't know where it was from, and that's why I love Grok, because you can just kind of like Grok these things and it will explain how it works. I mean, obviously you can go to other AIs and I'm sure they would understand as well, but this is actually a quote from Jony Ive, I guess in 2013 at Apple, where they were just talking about like focus and design and like, you know, Apple was notorious for not having a lot of features. Like they would wait a long time to add features that Androids already have, for example, with phones. But they would make sure to perfect it, right? And so that's kind of what this quote ties to as well. It's like, if everyone is busy making everything, how can anyone perfect anything? And obviously in the age of AI, I think that's more true than ever, where it's like, we really need to make sure that we're leveraging these gains, not for breadth first project creation, where it's like, oh, now I have a new idea, I can ship a new product. That was kind of the idea when like Claude Code first really started popping in like December, I guess. But at least for me, I've really realized that like, no, because of these efficiencies, we have to focus more on the projects we're working on, not less. And I'm not sure that Guillermo's necessarily saying that specifically, but it is interesting, this quote coming out. There's all this stuff about taste as well that's happening right now. I don't even want to acknowledge it because it's still kind of like formulating right now, but it is kind of tied to what we're talking about here. Okay, next we have the chief of autism coming out saying that someone built a tool that removes LLM censorship in 45 minutes with a single command. It's called Heretic, and we don't have to go too deep in exactly how it works, but if you want to check out the GitHub, it's really cool. And they said that I think they have GPT OSS 20 billion parameters, being able to do anything, like it's not refusing any commands, and they kind of have benchmarks on refusals. I think they went from like 100 refusals to like 3 on Gemini, and it's just pretty interesting, you know, if you want like these kind of open source jailbroken. I know there was someone who replied to one of our other videos about the jailbreaks for Opus. This could be something interesting to look into if you really want like full uncensored intelligence. It will be a very interesting idea moving into the future of like, what are these labs going to hide from us versus like, are we just going to have local models that can do whatever we want, and what will be the balance between those, and like, will they try to regulate local models, etc. Obviously the regulators don't know anything, so we're kind of cooked there no matter what. We just got to hope for some libertarianism, honestly, even though I'm for sure like more leftist than most tech people. It's just like these regulators have no idea what they're doing in terms of tech, so kind of a troubling situation. But for now, you can get an uncensored model and you can run it locally and it'll do whatever you want, like creating napalm, I guess. That used to be the test back in the day. Okay, next we have a tweet from this account, Hugging Models. I guess it's kind of like a fan page of Huggingface, but what they are announcing is that NVIDIA just dropped Persona-plex 7 billion, which is a full duplex model, which, like, as he says, basically means that it talks while you're talking. It's not like turn-based walkie-talkie type conversations, which is like what people were saying below. And I guess a lot of companies are working on these duplex models, which makes sense because it's how humans work, right? Where you can interrupt people, you can talk at the same time. And it is pretty cool, and it's only 7 billion parameters. So, but it is open source. It's from NVIDIA. It's on Huggingface. So if you're doing any of this voice stuff, maybe it could be interesting for like chatting with Claudebot on Discord, for example, is something I'm kind of considering and maybe having it figure out. But very cool. All this new stuff coming out. Obviously, the industry's changing so much every day, but that's why Twitter is so good for like staying on top of it, you know? Okay, next we just have a quick tweet from Sam Lambert. I don't really have too much to speak on this. I just thought it was kind of fascinating where they're saying that at Planetscale, their orchestration and Vitesse/Neki. I didn't know what Neki was, but it's essentially Vitesse for Postgres, and Vitesse was created at Google for YouTube, I believe, and it's essentially like an infinitely sharding, scalable MySQL. So the people who created Vitesse, I guess at Planetscale also created this thing called Neki, which is like an infinitely scalable, shardable Postgres. And they're saying that the orchestration and those teams are the two largest teams at Planetscale Engineering, while the other teams' infrastructure and surfaces are impressively small given the amount of work they pump out. So just kind of fascinating. You know, I don't know too much about like these higher level startup ideas of like building certain teams or like how do you decide how to segment teams given the startup, right? It's not like you just have like engineering and design in this example. It's like these are all engineering teams, but they're separated into different products, I guess, or different focuses. So just kind of fascinating and kind of inside ball knowledge on Planetscale, which is always cool because they're so highly respected as a database company. Next, we have a tweet from Toby, who's the CEO of Shopify. We'll talk about him a little bit later as well, I believe, but he just has this tweet, and like these are kind of small tweets, but they're so fascinating. You know, there's so much context behind these like very short sentence tweets, but he's saying being quote unquote creative but easily distractible is no longer a disadvantage with infinite agents on your screen. I could not disagree with this more personally. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what he's saying, and I kind of replied to a tweet down here as well, but essentially what this is saying, right, is that like if you're easily distractible, it's like, okay, now you have an agent, so you can go ship out a prompt for an agent to do something for you, right? If you are distracted or whatever. But it's like, it really depends on what products you're doing and what tasks you're actually having these agents do, right? Because like Toby, for example, a lot of people are talking about how he has so many Git commits this year, where it's like in 2025 or whatever, I think he had like 200 commits for the whole year, where it's like this year he has like 500 commits for just the first 2 months, you know? And people are saying like, oh, that means that CEOs can now ship. And then there's also people being like, oh, well, it's the worst thing in the world if the CEO is writing code, you know? But if you just go look at his GitHub, you can see it's pretty much all just like local CLI dev tools that he's committing to, but he's done like hundreds of commits for a few of them. And then he also has like some personal projects, I guess, that's like racing related, like car racing, that he's keeping track of. But it's like, you can't read this and be like, Toby is going to launch another Shopify, you know, or be like even contributing to like hot paths on production is kind of what I said in my reply. It's like, this is not what he's writing code for, you know, he's writing code for small tools that interest him. Like he has this try thing that creates like a new project with AI, and it's very like indie hacker vibes, but it's like, those are not products that are going to be released and sold, you know, those are just toys, honestly, that he's playing with in terms of like what's actually being delivered, you know? So I think a lot of people are really, and including myself before my realization, are conflating this idea of like being able to ship a bunch of prompts, being able to generate code versus actually being able to deliver products end to end. And I just think we have to be really careful. You know, Toby's obviously already rich, so it's like he can do whatever the hell he wants, you know, and he's CEO of Shopify, so he can literally just do whatever the hell he wants. But for us, or at least for me, who's trying to like build a company, build my career, and, you know, like grow my net worth, it's like, no, focusing on startups and focusing on products and experiments that actually have super high leverage is much more important than like spreading myself thin across 10 different projects, just trying to recreate the same SaaS, trying to recreate the same Google Workspace. It's like, I don't have employees who can do these things for me, you know? And I can like, I guess, spin up some agents to sign up for Google Workspace, but it's like, is that actually what I want them to do? How is that password being transferred? You know, what are the pros and cons there? Like if it gets stuck, how do I fix it? So maybe that's kind of a skill issue on my end, but I definitely disagree with this idea. And I think it's very scary for people who are getting into the game or who are already in the game, who are like, oh, now with agents, I can launch 10 different projects, you know? And even looking at like the creator of Claudebot, now OpenClaw, and it's like he has like 50 repos, right, on his GitHub About Me or his GitHub README. But if you look at all those, they're all just components of OpenClaw, you know? He was delivering one product, which is OpenClaw, and it had a bunch of components, and he said he was working like 18 hours a day on it, which is amazing. But it's not like he was doing 50 different projects and 50 different SaaSes, you know? It's like you have your one product, you have your one startup that you're working on, which is how it was pre-AI, but now the leverage and the ability to deliver more things for that one product and make it more substantial and make it more differentiated compared to competitors is where the real leverage is at, not just working on like 50 things at once. Okay, this tweet's kind of a side thing, but personally interesting to me because I'm a fan of Whoop and I use it as well. I haven't tried this out yet, but basically it seems like Whoop actually released an update, and I saw this on my app as well, where it says that like weightlifting, HIIT, functional fitness, and other strength workouts now automatically estimate muscular strain, no logging needed. So I wonder how that works, like with the gyroscope and all that stuff. And like, I'm not into hardware at all, I'm purely software, but it is cool, the idea, because previously what you would have to do is use this app they have called Strength Trainer. It's not like an app, but it's like a feature built into their app where you would like basically say, hey, here's the weight, here's the reps that I did, and it would calculate the strain based on that. And strain is basically like how hard your body worked, and it's primarily based on heart rate, but that's where it's like adding these strength workouts with muscular strain is a separate thing where it's like, you know, you're lifting heavy weight, but it's not necessarily raising your heart rate. So it's just really cool. You know, we're moving into the future of these wearables. It'll be interesting to see if more wearables come out. Obviously the watch and like the Oura Ring, for example, are like the main ones, or, you know, the 8 Sleep, which isn't necessarily a wearable, but it's like a smart bed and just smart tech in general. We kind of like went backwards, right? Like people don't really like IoT anymore. They don't really like smart tech because of the privacy and the security implications, but it is really cool to see these like products still being upgraded and moving more towards the future. And I hope eventually we'll be able to get to like some scenario where IoT will be safe again, but maybe it's just a product of the web where it's like none of these things will ever be safe if they're connected to the internet in any way. And maybe that speaks to like local models and local systems for your smart home or whatever. Okay, next we just have a quick tweet from Resend. I'm not sure if people really care about this. It seems like it was a very minor incident, but like these outages and incidents and just reliable software in general is very fascinating to me, so I like to cover these things. But they're saying yesterday Resend experienced an incident causing email sending delays and errors loading the dashboard. No emails were lost. And essentially after reading the postmortem, basically what happened is that they were handling too many active connections from their Postgres database, and it went from like 50 average connections to like 300, and essentially they just had one app that was like allowed to have too many connections. So I guess they kind of fixed the pooler. They kind of restricted different applications to only have a specific maximum limit of how many connections they can have to the database at one time, which I guess increases latency for those specific applications, but it stops like the noisy neighbor problem of like overloading the database for other applications. So just kind of interesting, and you can look into the postmortem, and these things are so fascinating to me because it's like the ideal, right, is 100% uptime. So anytime there is an outage, it's like there is a lesson to take away from like how do we make sure this never happens again, and they talk about that more in the blog as well. So pretty interesting. Okay, next we just have some drama, kind of light drama, I guess, but it's a tweet from Aiden Bai, who's the creator of Million. That's what I know him for, which was like this React optimization, but now he has this product called amy.dev or ami.dev. And it's essentially like a website cloner, which I think he also did as well. I think it was called like Same previously. So I'm not really too tapped into his products, but they had this insane P0 bug, which is like the highest priority, but also a product that my friend is launching. And he says that basically their users were getting randomly logged out, and they had a bunch of users churn, which sucks. And it turns out it was NextJS prefetching the logout page. But then in kind of like a reverse Uno card, Guillermo and a bunch of people came in and basically said, logout should never be a get. It exposes CSRF attacks. And I don't know like what you would kind of benefit from making people log out, but essentially like your get should not be triggering side effects, and I guess in general get should not be triggering side effects. So just kind of interesting learning experience. I kind of made a mistake with my processing of this and like talking to my friend about it, so I have some reflection to do myself, but I thought it was kind of counterintuitive and interesting. And you know, for me, I'm just kind of doing the classic stuff where it's like you just load the logout page, which calls a mutation and then redirects. So I kind of like have the security, or I guess the CSRF protection by default, just through like the way I learned it. But it is kind of interesting, you know, if you try to get tricky with these things, that you can kind of run into some bad practices and I guess have your users churn, you know, so that's where it's dangerous to push things to prod, and also speaks to like not just letting AI push it to prod as well. Okay, next we have this tweet from this guy Sonny, who is a VP at NVIDIA. I'm not too tapped in on the startup finance stuff. I'm trying to learn more about it, you know, to eventually be like a proper founder. Right now I'm still kind of just like an engineering IC software engineer. But they have this chart from The Economist, which shows basically that the Bay Area raised $150 billion in 2025, and all the next 9 geographies, which is New York, LA, London, Boston, Austin, Paris, Seattle, Beijing, Bangalore, and Denver, all raised less than that. They raised about 118 billion, so there's still about 36 billion or so unaccounted for that the Bay Area raised more. They do say how much of this is 3 to 5 companies though, because obviously Anthropic, I mean, I guess they raised the 30 billion in 2026, but Anthropic, OpenAI, etc. have been raising tons of money, obviously, because they're not profitable, and they're on like their growth spurt right now. But it is interesting, you know, I'm based out of LA, so it is cool to see it in the 3rd place. And also people were noting that Miami was missing from this list. So I don't know what's up with that. It's kind of like a tax haven, I guess, for the rich. It's not really for like building necessarily, but I know when Founders Fund moved over there, people thought they were going to start building. But as you can see here, at least the capital raising isn't too productive in any place except for the Bay Area, and SF still stays on top. There have been some times where I'm like, maybe I should move to SF just to kind of like fully engross myself in the culture, but it's also kind of like the internet culture and the LA culture and the weather and all that stuff is just so nice that it's hard to leave. But looking at charts like this definitely makes you like consider, are you missing out, you know, by not being in the Bay, especially if you're trying to raise money as a founder. Okay, and last we just have one more tweet from this guy Palmer, who I guess does AI infrastructure at FAANG. He doesn't say what company, but it's just an interesting idea for like engineering and best practices in tech. And, you know, in the age of AI, I'm so excited about all these ideas of like having better practices for engineering, because a lot of the like menial stuff has been taken away. But now it also speaks back to the previous story we were talking about, where it's like it's a lot more cognitive effort to actually work on software these days. But he has this interesting point that he just made about Shopify, which was replying to this tweet from Lulu about culture set by Toby and engineering culture in general. And essentially he's saying that Shopify is the only company he's ever seen that quote unquote exercises new tests before allowing a commit in order to eliminate flaky tests. I didn't really get what this meant, so I also like shipped it to Grok, and basically it's saying that they run tests that you add in new commits multiple times, because if they're flaky tests, then they're going to fail, whereas if they're actually solid tests, they're going to succeed every single time, like deterministically, obviously. So that's pretty interesting. They were doing this in 2019. There's a blog post I think that Grok found from 2019 about for specifically how they were doing this, and I forget what they called it, but they had like a specific name for it, obviously, such an engineering thing to just come up with these random jargon names for these different practices, but very cool. I don't know how much it'll matter for like a startup to have like exercising new tests and make sure they're not flaky. For me, I kind of go to the idea that people were talking about pre-AI, which is like just try to make your logic as much pure functions as possible so that it's very easy to test, right? You're just testing input output. Whereas like when you're talking to these boundaries, you kind of like have to mock essentially. And people used to hate mocking so much. It's like kind of interesting in hindsight, because I was just learning when I was a kid, like how to do this engineering stuff. But people were so opinionated, and it was always like, okay, well, I have to listen to this person because they know more than me. People hated mocking so much. People hated testing so much. People weren't writing tests at all. I wasn't writing tests at all for a while. Now I think we're in a much better place, obviously, because of AI as well, and just kind of understanding that, like, hey, test the things that are pure functions, test the IO as much as you can, because you basically lose nothing for it, especially in the age of AI, in terms of, like, it takes 2 seconds to write it. Like, you don't even have to write it yourself. But just kind of interesting engineering culture, engineering stuff. There's always so much creativity in this industry, and I'm sure that's not going to stop anytime soon.
This kind of stuff interests you and you want to talk with some like-minded people, join the Audinato Discord in the description. Thanks.